Hey,
God, I'm going to try to not scream so I don't cause an echo. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm so good. Happy early birthday.
Same to you.
I know. Look at us. Okay, I have a real question because I thought about this the first time I came over and your parents made me lobster tail and steak.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, does Taylor secretly hate me for crashing this? Because they do it
Nah.
up. Like, I can't believe how they do birthdays.
Mm-hmm. Nah, it's okay. Don't worry about it.
I always thought, and so you're born on the 11th, right?
Yep.
And I'm born on the 10th, allegedly. Is it okay if I do your numerology just for fun? I've never done
Yeah,
this.
go for
Okay, so you're right, so you're December 11, master number. And then what year were you born? 3 or sorry, 6?
it. 96.
Right, so it's 12, 11, 1. Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So you're a 3 life path, but you're a 30. So that's kind of like a 3 on steroids. Interesting. Yeah. And 3 is just actually a lot about communication, which I guess that's the calling for you to, you know what I mean?
Who knows? Who
Well, you're an
knows?
amazing speaker. I mean, I can't tell you. I feel like I annoyed before you got there on Thanksgiving. I was just like seriously just ranting about like how great of a conversation we get to having.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I even told her, I was like, just because we don't really do that while we're eating and drinking and having
Yeah.
fun, it's like been such a cool thing to explore with you because you are, I often, and this is an arrogance thing on my end, I know it for a fact. I kind of always think I'm like a really good thinker and a really good speaker. And talking to you, just the way that you articulate yourself, I'm always like, dang, all right, here we go. And I love that. Like, it's great. Oh, okay, so I have a question about the birthday thing. You know how
Mhm.
there's always some like counterculture, like, oh, by the way, I should be doing like intros better more, so we're gonna try. But welcome. So, oh no, it says Terry Groom. That's so funny.
Oh
Here,
gosh.
I can change it. Do you want Taylor or Steven?
Just put Steven. That's easier.
Okay. Ooh, I could add a title. Oh my God. Nighteye. A founder, CEO. What do you want?
Owner, whatever. Whatever works.
I'm going founder. Okay, cool. Also, you're gonna let me know when you have another investigation.
Yeah, definitely.
Bad bitch extraordinaire. I'm just kidding. Okay, cool. All right. Well, welcome to The Wolf and the Bear After Dark, because we are going to get into some stuff that is a little bit off what we normally go into. We are here with Stephen Groom, the founder of Nighteye Paranormal. Also, my brother from another mother. We're one day apart in birthday, which is so weird and cool. And so we have been getting together and sort of talking about more of the occult stuff, more of the paranormal stuff, all kind of the stuff that I think Terry would be like, I'd rather just be doing readings and like
Yep.
not
Yep.
listening to all this. And, so I think she's probably a little bit relieved too, because I'm always going to ask somebody and I'm sure she's
Yeah.
tired of my ass. Okay. So with that out of the way though, um, so when I was in all those discords and we were kind of talking about, I was sort of having this like death of the reality I thought I knew. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows really how accurate any of that was necessary or anything. But there was sort of this idea that the whole birthday song, have you heard this like theory that the birthday song is actually sort of like a spell, a curse? And
I
so the
haven't
fact,
heard that, but I mean, technically, all magic really is just rituals that you perform to get some kind of outcome from. So, I mean, it can kind of fit, I guess.
well,
It's just
people
a
were
standard
saying that
ritual.
like the fact that you blow out your own candle.
Mhm.
And there's sort of that, like, I don't know. I thought it was a very interesting perspective. I was wondering if
Yeah,
you'd
I
ever heard that.
can see that. I've never heard that, but it makes sense a little bit.
But anywho, okay, so today we're kind of going to get into sort of your perspective of magic, and I would love to sort of go into some of the biblical stuff with like the keys of Solomon and kind of go into what that story was really saying that he did because I'm very curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do have to get into the two different types of magic
Mhm.
just before we can start really delving into things. There is a right-hand path and left-hand path. It's not dark versus light. That's kind of more of a modern understanding of things. Right-hand path in the past was believed to be at the right hand of God, so it was supposed to be at the benefit of other people, while left-hand path was basically your own path. You were using magic for your own gain, regardless of how it impacted everyone else.
And for the listeners who are unfamiliar as well, the paths, when we say path, we're actually kind of referring to the Kabbalistic tree of life, because whenever you sort of see that, which is sort of the Hermetic Gnostic version of ancient Judaism, and it's interesting because there is a zigzag path theoretically that you can take on the, I might pull it up for everybody, on the tree of life, that is emulated in like Pink Floyd, in a lot of these logos, but it's actually kind of considered a dark path the way it zags. So just a curious little tidbit of fun. But anyways, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. So the modern interpretation of black versus white magic really isn't correct necessarily. It is an oversimplification on things. Typically, you would view left-hand path as being closer to what we would view as black magic nowadays, but it doesn't always have to be a negative. It is just benefiting yourself over others. Right-hand path would be, a lot of people would say, oh, that's white magic. Well, that's just benefiting everyone else around you, regardless of the detriment to yourself. So it is kind of a little bit less good and evil and a little bit more outcome dependent.
Interesting. Okay. In the effect of who it benefits.
Yes.
Okay. Now, where do you think the earth magic, things like that, sort of the part where you start necessitating elemental energies to charge what you do?
So those can be used either for left or right hand path. They're not really necessarily dependent on a specific side of the coin to really work or to be used. You do typically see more nature elements in right hand path than you do left hand path. But
Okay.
that's just because people tend to call on nature a little bit more when they're trying to benefit the world around them, while they are
Oh.
calling on more, I guess you could say, self-important deities when they're trying to do left-hand path magic.
Do you, this is going to sound like a leading question, but I guess this is more of like a fear of mine, and I enunciate this a lot, but with the left-hand path, is there a point where if you see people working within it, where you start to see things go south, like things start to look a little bit unwell or poisoned?
Yeah, so there's definitely a side of left-hand magic that tends to be a little bit more damaging to people, and that's where you see people get into things like curses and basically trying to make other people find their downfall. It tends to trigger back on them, and that's what is called in magic as the rule of threes. So whatever you put onto someone else, you get back 3 times towards yourself. And on the other side of things, with the right-hand path magic, if you're putting good things onto other people, you're going to get that back to yourself as well. So both of them can be relatively self-serving. It's
Dang, I never
just,
thought about that.
yeah, it's just who gets the immediate benefit and what the intent is behind.
So I'm so far out of this world of understanding, just because the study I've done has always been about like the origin of things, but never the what, why. So can you give me an example, like a literal example of right hand path? And let's throw it into the ancient times. Let's say somebody, sits at the right hand of the emperor and they are trying to do something to be good, I guess, to help the people. I don't know.
So a good example of that in modern day time would be things like healing magic.
Okay.
But there is argument to be made that a lot of the Solomonic magic started out right-hand path after the fall of Solomon, and basically the god that was in charge of that revoking that form of magic, it kind of leaned more towards left-hand afterwards. But initially it was right-hand path. For a little bit more information, a lot of the magic of Solomon was focused on basically constraining demons to convince them to do his will, and the will was always supposed to be beneficial to the kingdom or God's country, as they believed it.
So how do you think, based on your study, where do you think that kind of went wrong? If the stories are to be taken literally.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is Solomon started worshiping false gods, basically. And that's where the magic
Which one?
it's very debatable. It's been kind of lost to history, honestly. Everything that I've read kind of points towards one of the older, more, I'd say Gilgamesh era gods rather than modern false gods during that time frame. But when he started doing that, all of the magic that was given to him by the main god that he was worshiping was taken away because he made a slight against them.
Mm. Guess you can't do
And
that.
when, yeah, yeah. And when it was taken away, basically everything that he was using to keep them under control kind of went away, but he still thought he had some level of control.
Mm-hmm.
And it all went to hell, basically.
So why do they call them the keys of Solomon?
So they're supposed to be keys into understanding the magic that he was using. It's more of like a direct description of what the book is supposed to be. It's kind of the gateway piece so that you can really open yourself up and understand that. Although nowadays it's not
What?
really useful.
So just out of curiosity, all I
So
looked up
those
was
sigils.
Solomon sigils.
Yes.
So those are not the same things as the keys.
No, they are not. The keys are the actual books.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Forgive my ignorance. I just don't
No, you're
know.
good. You're good.
So why do people sometimes get this like tattooed on their body and stuff? The key of Solomon.
So it depends on which one
Mm,
specifically. That specific one is more of a protection overall kind of sigil.
mm-hmm.
There are so many sigils, though. I mean,
Really?
just looking at what you're scrolling through right now, I mean, there's probably a couple hundred on that page. Everything represents something different. Everything represents other specific things. That one is, kind of one of the more common ones for people to kind of lean towards.
Mm.
I use the Solomonic triangle personally for a lot of my stuff. It tends to be kind of a protection against demonic. Now, a lot of
That's
these
what you have
images,
that tattooed on you, don't you?
yes, I do.
Yeah, I
Right on my
remember
right
this. I
ankle.
remember this. Yeah, 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 yeah. Cool, cool, cool. Dang. So, okay, when you go through like all the, I mean, really, you can find it in the Asia stuff. You can find it in a
Mm,
lot of the Vedic stuff, right? But when they talk, and actually, I was just talking to your mom about this kind of. It slipped in during our podcast this morning, but
mm,
we were talking a little bit of the seven seals, right?
mm,
Speak about it in the Bible, blah blah. But it's also in like astrotheology. I mean, it's basically saying that when we choose to incarnate here, we
mm,
have to pass through these seven influences, correct? And each influence, each vibration is essentially tethered to my understanding of it is to what we appropriate to the planetary energies.
mm,
So there would be like a Venusian seal, essentially. And there's a lot of beauty there. There's a lot of things that we find passion about, et cetera, et cetera. Some
mm,
people would say that's the Lucifer's particular
mm,
energy of that beauty in the music before he fell, or maybe even still. But
mm,
so when we think about the responsibility of that, right? That we've got to deal with not only our goals to get things done here in this world, but we're
mm,
sort of at the mercy of the way that these interact with each other astrologically. And, I do see, I've read enough charts to where I see some stuff that is like wildly explanatory in sort of a forgiving way. And what I mean is,
mm,
I'm not the person who thinks that the stars run the world. And I'm not the person who thinks that I'm not particularly interested in the divination of it. And I know the Vedic is actually really accurate, the people that are amazing at that. So I know that there is something there. And I do think that there are some predictive cycles that the
mm,
stars can, map, right? And I know that sounds really woo woo, but I've talked to enough people. It's kind of like doing
mm,
the mediumship and the psychic thing. It's like
mm.
you have to do it with people
Yeah.
enough times to see, dang, because I went into learning charts to debunk it. Like I wanted to be
Mm,
like, this is so dumb. And then over time you see like certain insecurities. You're like, you didn't do that to yourself. Look at this stuff. Like, and for that to be like, for instance, and this is kind of a weird thing about free will,
mm,
But there's a marker in, and if anyone knows astrology, they're going to murder me because I may be not the most well versed, but I'm studious. I'm studied in it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a placement called the Chiron placement. And it's sort of that wounded, Chiron was the wounded healer, but it sort
Mm-hmm.
of denotes an area of life where it's going to kind of be like a burr under your saddle. And it's sort of going to be a challenge to heal. It's almost going to be a focal
Mm-hmm.
point of suffering. That sounds really dramatic, but it's not really. So, for instance, if you have a Chiron placement in the second house of material wealth, you might either be really materialistic or you might struggle to keep money. And mine is in my fourth house, which is sort of the family and foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And my point with that is to say, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did
Mm-hmm.
the stars know that my parents were going to suck, or did I, which came first? And who's to say? And I don't act like I know who makes those decisions. But I think that when people talk about the gods and talk about the mythology of the way that they fight, and I'm talking about the ancient ones,
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is definitely something to those who prescribe that to activities at the time of astrological events. And it is weird to think if we used to be much closer to spirit and much closer to the land, do you think it's possible that we were much more influenced to those things than we are now? We're just kind of disconnected.
I think it's actually kind of the opposite.
Oh, interesting. Please explain.
So, since we are more removed from them, we are also not really able to recognize when those things are
Mm,
influencing us, as opposed
yeah.
to in the past where you could recognize it and you could kind of step around it in a way. You
Hmm.
could make your decision based on more logic rather than what your specific birth signs and all the other stuff recommend you do, essentially.
Yeah. There. I haven't studied this next part because it's so arduous. Like, it's a lot to. It was already a lot to kind of learn when I did.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this thing. It's gonna sound so dumb, but it's literally called a time lord,
Mm-hmm.
and it's over a year, right? So this is so complicated, but there does seem to be some truth to it. So if you want to
Mm-hmm.
understand what the next year holds for you, there's this thing called a year of perfection,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the focal house. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really matter. I thought that that's what mattered. I thought that, oh, if it's the fourth house, you're going to be working on family or stability.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually figuring out who runs that house planetarily and then what that planet is doing all year. So if
Mm-hmm.
it's poorly aspected with everything, it's going to be a little bit of a tumultuous year potentially. So then you look at it and say, well, maybe I'm not going to start big new things, but we don't watch it that closely. I certainly don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there were ways to counteract what the year was going to bring to you in the past that we don't necessarily have anymore. So we're
Tell me
kind
what
of,
you mean.
I mean, you could do things that could kind of pull you out of that cycle, essentially. So let's say the
Yeah.
upcoming year is going to be bad for your business or a bad time to explore, bad time to go places. Well, that's more of a guideline as
Yeah.
to how you've acted up to that point and what is going to likely happen. I believe that understanding what the future is supposed to hold based on those kind of readings is the most important thing when it comes to changing them. So there's not really a
I agree.
need, yeah, there's not really a need to actually follow through with that. It's more of a understanding that this is likely if I don't change certain things or I don't do certain things. Obviously, you can always fight up against the river and things will work out more or less.
True.
Some people think that it's more of a guidelines of what would be most beneficial to you during that year. But I think that that kind of gets swayed with the choices that we make throughout our lives. Just because in that reading, you're always going to, if you do that reading at any point for that specific year, it's always going to kind of show up as the same thing, essentially. So let's say you do a reading for next year and you did the same reading 3 years ago. They would likely be very similar results. I think that because humans are able to make choices, it kind of throws off that time schedule that we have.
Mm-mm.
And that
Bad.
means that it might not be next year. It might have been this year. It might have been the year before that.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't know currently.
I feel a little bit a little bit kind of, and the irony is obviously what I do, what your mom does, basically what you do, even though you're not super client facing, but you're sensitive, but
Hmm.
I remember when I was training with Terri, I was dating people and I was never, I mean, A, I thought it'd be rude as all hell because she's my teacher and not there to give me free readings all the time.
Hmm.
And B, there came a point where I really didn't want to know because
Hmm.
A, it wasn't fair because he couldn't go to somebody and discern things. And I felt that it was almost like taking away from my ability to experience that authentically.
Yeah.
So I felt
Uh,
protective of that.
Absolutely. And there's also something that I've ran into with the current client of mine where she gets readings and she gets answers that can be interpreted in two ways, one positive, one negative. And she's always leaning towards the negative.
Mm.
And readings can be helpful, but I think that if you take everything at face value with a reading or you interpret things in a way that kind of fits with the story that you're trying to tell yourself, it can be more damaging than anything.
Well, it's sort of like, people I had an old roommate who she was always going to her same therapist, and she was, like, 8 years in, and I remember
Hmm.
thinking, "This therapist ain't doing anything." If anything, maybe making it worse, and
Hmm.
that was just a knowingness I had because I thought, he oh, you're not getting better." But
Well, it's just like in medicine. Why sell the cure when you can sell the treatments that cost three times as much?
yeah, I just don't even know. Who knows if there's even that much awareness to it. Maybe he's just bad at what he does. Maybe he thinks it's
Maybe.
always going to be a dialogue. And maybe I just hold a different opinion that it's
Yeah.
like medicine. You don't keep taking it if you don't need it.
Yeah.
But then again, here I do this podcast and that's a lot like therapy. So maybe I'm just covering it up in something else. But, you know, anywho, with the astrological thing though, there is a lot of argument to suggest that things have felt different since the eclipse,
Oh, absolutely.
and something real did happen.
Yeah. Even ignoring the astrological impact and all of the readings that those are giving, things have just been way, way off for quite a
Yeah.
while, honestly. And yeah, the eclipse was one of the things that things started getting
When
bad
was that? Back
after.
in March?
Yeah.
When did we Yeah.
The big one that I've noticed though is things really started going downhill after that solar flare that we had.
Mm.
That is when things started getting really weird. For me personally, in my line of work,
Mhm.
I don't know how that necessarily reflects on other lines of work, but I've noticed with the demonic since that major solar flare, there have been way more cases that I've had to investigate that involved a demonic or involved a more negative entity than I have pretty much ever had. And typically, when you go on those kind of investigations, the mindset going in is that it's probably going to be about 1% of the time that it's demonic, about 40% of the time that it is nothing, that they're just reacting to nothing, and the rest of it is, oh, it's a human spirit or it's a nature spirit or it's whatever. But it has shifted recently to almost 40% demonic. It's been really strange.
Yeah, I don't, is that I guess I wonder, what could that really mean? I mean, because it's hard to assign, but it's like, does that indicate that the whole world is just becoming more energized spiritually, almost like it's waking back up?
Mhm.
Or is it because it's being asked forward?
I think it's kind of a mixture of both. We did discuss in the last episode a little bit of kind of popular culture bringing in the darker things into light more often
Yes.
than not. I think that more people are not really understanding things, but still trying to practice, and it's causing more negative things to happen around the world. But that being said, I think that it would be a falsehood to fully blame humanity for it as well. I think that there is something else that's going on behind the scenes that we just don't know about, and we
Mhm.
probably never will,
Mhm.
that is causing a massive upsurgence in these kind of things.
Well, I'm about to jump off the deep end and probably lose maybe some credibility, who knows? I believe that there is something being managed about our sun. So I don't know that we are getting either the full authentic expression or there's something off. And there's lately, a lot of farmers have been posting these videos where the sunflowers aren't even facing towards the sun that we're being shown. It's something, there's a lot of interesting things happening to manage our electromagnetic reality. I think that a lot of people are doing readings over, and it sucks because it's right over DFW as well that it's happening. But there seem to be these surges of electromagnetic pulsings that begin in the evenings and go through the night. And they are really a lot to do with some of the 5G towers. So these pulses are measurable. People are getting their own utensils. And I think that there's probably an argument that they're making us sicker. But we can't really do much about that. I think there's a reason that they told us lead paint was bad. So I'll leave that, there. But I would say, like, without turning into a complete, like, survivor, because I'm not a survivor. If the apocalypse breaks out, it's good knowing you. I'm not working that hard to survive. I promise you. But there's things that I'd probably participate if I had a home that was mine. And, there's things I would do because we are just being assaulted through vibrational attacks. And that's not even to say what's going on with the sun or like why that's acting weird. But what's your gut say about any of that?
My gut says that it's probably everything all at once, honestly.
Me too.
I think that it is difficult to point anything at a specific direction.
Yeah.
And even if we were able to, I'm not sure there's a point.
No, I agree. I think you're 100% right. To me, there's always been a weird desire for me to feel maybe that I'm in pursuit of the truth, but I'm thankful because I've just divorced myself from needing to have a real answer.
Yeah.
And maybe it would even stress me out, honestly, to have a real answer. But, back to your point sort of about what we are doing, right? What us as the unknowing as we participate. So back to the magic thing. So you said the right-hand path would have more to do about healing, probably more to do about healing the earth, preventing or providing. Well, I don't know. They sacrificed a lot for rain and fertility. So I don't know. I don't know how right-hand that got or that stayed. And then obviously, just for, I think everyone can determine, but what would you say an example of left hand would be?
Demonic summoning, doing things like charms to make yourself lucky that would negatively basically siphon luck off of other people. There's a ton, honestly. Basically, anything you see in the old movies with the witch covens is probably what would fit in with that.
Dang. Okay. So let's get into that. Okay. So you just touched on this reality of there is no such thing as making a charm that just only makes you luckier. Correct? There is always a price. And the price is either your life essence, correct? Or someone else's, like you said, luck. Someone else's.
Yeah, someone else's luck. I think saying life essence for those kind of actions is a little bit extreme. I don't think something like luck would cost life essence typically. It would just be basically siphoning that off of someone else. But basically, one of the key defining features of left-hand path would be transferring the impact, the negative, basically the cost onto someone else.
Yeah.
Right-hand path, typically people will take the cost themselves and use whatever they receive to benefit everyone else, while left-hand path typically will force the cost onto another person and then get the benefit from that. And that is one thing that you see with a lot of covens, which I'm sure there are viewers who hear me say coven and are like, oh, those aren't real things. There are people who practice, and yes, they call themselves covens, where they will split the negative impact amongst themselves to get something done. And typically that's the safer way to do it and the kinder way to do it because everyone involved is willing, but it's not, that doesn't magically make it right hand leaning either.
That's a great point. And also, when we say covens, that originates within the Bible, and they are basically sharing a explained and understood and articulated covenant together.
Yeah.
Just like we create covenants with God, or just like we create covenants with whatever we want to. right? But it's a
Yeah.
spiritual agreement.
And in a modern sense, I think that a large portion of biblical definitions on that have kind of faded away. Most people nowadays just view covens as a group of people that they practice with, and they don't necessarily fully jump into the spiritual agreements.
But
That
that's
being
what it
said,
is.
yeah, I mean, that is the definition of it, but it's not necessarily how people practice anymore.
Okay.
That words change meaning over time, and because of how modern society has developed and witchcraft has become so popular, and most of the people who are jumping into witchcraft are not necessarily the religious type, they're more the spiritual type. They don't really interpret it as the same thing, and their intent is not the same entering in as what would be required to do the spiritual agreement between all of the different people. And that's why you see covens that a lot of people call them temporary covens. More or less, it's just groups of people that get together, practice, then disperse, and then maybe they get together again later or not. Who knows?
But aren't there real repercussions? Not well,
Mm-hmm.
there are real tethers there. There are real, when you practice together, you're interlocking your spiritual willpower, correct?
Yes, it depends what you're practicing doing, though.
Mm.
There are certain spells that would involve interlocking everyone's willpower and everyone's spiritual essence. But there are others that don't necessarily. Typically, what will happen on the ones that they don't normally interlock that kind of thing is one person will carry out the act and the others will agree to take the negative from it. And they're
Hmm.
not necessarily putting in their essence into the actual spell. What they're doing is they're making themselves the receiver of the payback for that spell, which is a little bit more complicated and a little bit different.
Dang. See, I think most people, I think your average hippie chick is not looking into this in this way. Or do you think I'm wrong? Am I overly fearful about their ignorance?
I think that to an extent you're not, but I think their ignorance is a little bit further than what you're thinking as well. A lot of them are so unstudied and unknowledgeable about these kind of things that they're just not doing things right. So it gets into a situation of basically just a bunch of idiots running around making noises, doing weird ass things in a dark room and nothing happens. The ones that you should be worried about are the ones that we don't know about. They're not the hippie
Yeah.
girls saying, "Oh, I joined a coven last week. I'm doing this." Well, their coven might as well just be a slumber party, honestly, because there's probably not anyone who actually knows what the hell they're doing there. They're just kind of playing around.
Mm.
But on the other hand, the people who don't tell you that they're in covens and the ones that are practicing behind the scenes are definitely more nefarious, more knowledgeable as well.
Well, I feel like my guys just reminded me of a prime example, and I remember talking about it in like one of the earliest episodes with Terri. I don't know, it was
Mm-hmm.
just so harshly on my mind. There was this thing that became TikTok popular,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, have you heard of this? It was the egg reading thing. Okay. And so what Terri and I kind of wound up discussing was, and I don't know anything about that, but I have guides and they tell me a lot when I don't know stuff. And I couldn't figure out why that bothered me so much. And then it was sort of given to me that when you are doing that process, it's actually sapping you of creative energy. It's sapping you of ingenuity. So there's more going into that
Mm-hmm.
capturing
Mm-hmm.
than anybody was being told.
Yep.
So now you've got all of these people doing this because TikTok told you so. And there's real repercussions for that.
Yeah.
And then they are just like doing that. And there's a lot of very real, I feel like very real, like witchcraft procedures
Mm-hmm.
that are being popularized that are dangerous enough because of what they're instructing people to do. And so it isn't so much like, oh, these people are going to be intelligent. No, they're all
Mm-hmm.
just going to get together at the slumber party and steal from themselves their creative potential
Yeah.
and then crack it into water and tell each other
Mm-hmm.
what that means about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
I
what are we
can
doing?
I can see that, but typically for those kind of people, they're negatively impacting themselves with it. It's not something that necessarily reflects on society at large.
True, true. But I just mean that it's sad.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
is
no,
enough
it's
information to
absolutely
be
sad.
dangerous.
If you want to get into kind of the more dangerous things out there, I mean, look into Randonautica. That's
What is that?
weird. I would pull it up right now on your screen. So it was popular maybe 3, 4 years ago. There is a lot of argument to be said that it's kind of just randomly spewing out GPS coordinates, but there's too many weird events that happen during that.
Already has occult sigilism.
No, absolutely, yeah, the owl. Um, it's one of those things that basically people have made really, really, really stupid things really popular, and it just isn't reasonable at all.
What is it? Is it like a cult?
I'll give you a better explanation in person because it's easier to fully describe on a one-on-one. But basically, what it's doing is you're supposed to imagine an intent for your trip, and then it will show you a place that will bring about that intent, basically.
A
If
trip?
I'm
What do you mean?
like, it's actually traveling to a location,
Okay, okay,
like
okay.
physically traveling there. And I mean, yeah, it's benign if you're saying like, oh, happiness, and then you come across a field of sunflowers or something. But you see people who have ran across things like, I want it to be death. And then they go to an abandoned house and, there's like dead freaking rats or something. There's even a story of someone who found a dead body on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the problem with it isn't that it's not a situation where it's random in
Mm-hmm.
any way. I mean, you're not going to randomly want to find something related to death and then have a pin put you exactly on a dead body. That's just not how the world works.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, if there were hundreds of millions of people doing this every single second of every single day, yeah, that would happen eventually, but this was kind of fringe. I mean,
Mm.
it, they had a lot of downloads, they had a lot of people doing it, but it wasn't something that was as wide scale as like Pokemon Go or something like that.
Mm.
It was fringe enough that all of the negative repercussions that they were getting were kind of eerie.
Mm. Okay, so back to kind of like the magic thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you, to an unlearned person, how would you describe the difference between working within management, working within magic, and sort of the unique relationship we have with guides? And like, why is that different?
Guides are basically using recommendations or using energy that was already attached to yourself. Magic, you are asking the universe around you and doing rituals that will help influence the energy that you have rather than you doing it yourself or someone attached to you doing it yourself, doing it themselves. Magic is more of an external affecting the internal, while guides are more internal affecting the external.
Okay, so excuse me. I'm not quite sure. I mean, we've never talked about it. So for you, when you have the experience of convening with your guides, or when you see your guides, how intense is your clarity for that information for other people? Can you see other people's guides? Have you like what does sort of that look like for you?
It depends on the situation, honestly.
Because I
Sometimes
never
I
do.
can. Yeah.
Almost.
Sometimes I can. Um, and it becomes a situation of more reading lips because I can never hear them. I can never hear someone else's, but I can see them occasionally. Oftentimes, though, if I'm not able to see them, it's a situation where my guides will tell me what theirs are saying rather than, getting a direct bit of information from them. But guides are not used as often in magic as you would expect. In fact, they're kind of a rarity to be seen.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Well,
can
yeah,
have.
that wasn't about magic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I was curious
Absolutely.
because I have more questions about, well, I'm building, but I needed to kind of understand
Mhm.
when you okay, because I have different and I think probably lower grade if I'm being honest. Like when I connect with guides,
Mhm.
it's never a single voice. It's never like I know who they are because of my training and I can
Mhm.
convene with them when I go into meditation, but it is always claircogency. So I just
Mhm.
come into a knowingness about what's up and it feels a
Mhm.
certain type of way. So it know it's them. But for you, is it like your mom? Like, is it conversational?
Yes, but mine are a little bit more standoffish with a lot of things in the sense that they won't necessarily have a conversation. They'll
Okay.
just say something specifically and be like, nope, it's this. Or they'll show me something specifically. It'll never be, you should do this. It is, this is what you're going to do. You know that, right?
Mm.
And it is different for every single person, and it does depend on what their guides' personalities are like, obviously, and how receptive they are to actually listening to them.
When you say they, you mean like a person?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Are you good at listening to them? Because I don't think I'm great. I'm okay-ish.
Nah.
Yeah, okay. See, I'm sure they're exhausted with
Mhm.
what they have to do. We know they're there. We know they're probably right.
Mhm.
And we're still like, but Sterling's
Yeah.
got to find out for herself.
Yep.
Dang it. Why can't we just listen? Well, we're Sages, man. We can't do it.
Yep.
Can't do it, won't do it. You know, technically in Vedic, by the way, we're Scorpio, which fits me better, fits you a little bit better.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see it fitting.
Because I've always known there was no way I was only Sag, because that darkness within me, that sort of curiosity about it, the comfort I have with it sometimes, not like in doing dark things, because I'm not really great at that, but I like digging into it. And some
Definitely.
people don't want that. Like there's not a curiosity there.
Yeah, and then there's some people that think they have a curiosity there, and they really don't. So when you start pointing certain things out, like another different client that I have, when you start pointing things out to them or giving them references for things, they're very much like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm comfortable reading that, but send me more information, send me this. So that they'll ask you about it, but then when you give them the sources, they're like, no, I don't want to do that. No, definitely not. I don't want to look into that. And it's kind of weird.
Well, there's two guys in particular in the discords. One I think is a really good person, but I definitely think he's gotten himself attached to something that's not great. I think he knows it. Terri and I both advised him on it, actually, because he was on the podcast for a quick second. And it's just like a tale as old as time. A not bad person, just trying to figure it out, gets caught up.
Yeah.
And his final question to Terri was, and this is you never ask this question if things are going well, right? But he kind of was asking, like, how do I temper or sort of hush hush almost the synergy that he works with? He didn't ask it quite like that, but that's exactly what the question was, and we both heard it that way. And so you don't ask that when things are going smashingly. And then the other guy, I want to have him on the podcast so bad. I want to have him on while you're on, and I think he's going to say yes, but he's very in it. Like, he's more studied. He definitely has an arrogance there, but I perceive him as a class which could be dangerous. Not that I think he is, but he's at least studied enough. The other guy, I think he's just kind of trying to figure it out. But there's something about this guy where I don't feel anything on him, which makes me think he's dealing with some interesting, more good, more, I don't know how to say that, strong, I don't know. Or I could just be wrong. I'm very curious what you would think. But hopefully if I can get him to say yes, I'm going to call you immediately.
Okay.
But just to sort of have you there, because I want to let him talk. I want to let him have his experience about the topic. But I also want you there to be like, well, I'm curious. You
Definitely.
just know more. Anyways, oh my gosh, where was I going with that though? We were talking about kind of getting involved. Oh, I was just thinking of him because he's definitely read the stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He's well read. Where do you think with your guides, because the standoffishness, and I think people don't really understand this, our guide system, do you believe that there's a vibrational match necessary, that they do have a tendency to resemble their host, or do you think that it's completely rando?
I think it's a little bit of both, honestly. I think that a large portion of it is the guides kind of choose you just based on whatever they want, honestly. But I do think that there is kind of an energetic level where they wouldn't be able to see you if you weren't a close enough match to them. So just because you are similar does not mean that one is going to be like, you're the one.
That's
You
why
have to be someone who piques their interest, essentially.
Well, and also, I mean, is it true do you believe that our main guide, right, our gatekeeper, kind of is with us over lifetimes as well?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
okay.
I think that specific guide, though, kind of is a different story. I think that one is assigned to us at birth, and I think the rest kind of come and go based on whimsy, more or less.
Well, I mean, that one and the protector guide, right?
Yeah.
Those are kind of the two. And you always, when you see other people, you always see at least two.
Yeah. Normally, I don't see their main two, though.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What do you see?
I see one of the other ones that's connected to them typically, and I do see them in pairs normally. But I've kind of noticed the main two don't really like to show themselves to anyone who isn't, the person that they're connected to.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I've said that 100 times. That's my biggest sticking point. No psychic is going to look at you and be able to tell you about your main guides. They don't really allow it.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you see spirit animals around people?
Occasionally. Occasionally. Not as often as my mother, but occasionally.
Why do you think that that is shown to us sometimes? Like, how is that helpful information?
It depends on the situation. My mindset is that the spirit animals tend to be a little bit closer resembling the person's base personality, minus all of the decisions they've made, minus everything. So it's what they would behave like if there wasn't other things attached to them. And I think that sometimes it's important to know that. And the only way to really know that is to see what their spirit animals would be. And there are situations where it's kind of like either tell them to follow the path that they would do if they didn't have any preconceived notions, or tell them to avoid it completely.
Avoid what completely?
The path that they would normally take based on,
Dang, that is so interesting. Okay, so what is your opinion about, because I've said this before, but I can't remember, either this is what Terri shared with me, I can't remember where, but there was sort of a belief system as well where there are spirit animals that are a little bit more reason for a season, and they are there to support what energy you do not have or that you need help supporting. And so is there accuracy there or no?
I can see that. I wouldn't necessarily call, maybe to an extent.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a coin. In that case, you have one that represents you and one that doesn't. But I also don't know if I would necessarily call the one that is the opposite of you a spirit animal. I think I'd call it something else, and I'm not 100% sure what that would be, honestly. But I think saying that that's a spirit animal is very reductive
Okay.
in a way.
Interesting. Reductive in that you don't, like, you believe it's much more than that?
I mean reductive in the sense that you're basically missing kind of the point if you think of them as spirit animals to an extent. You are basically just making them be another thing that's connected to you rather than an actual impactful. It's very difficult for me to explain
No,
exactly
but I
what's
love
going
it. Please. Thank you.
on.
Help me understand what you like. Yeah.
I just think that if you call something that is supposed to be your negative a spirit animal, it's ignoring a lot of things that you could learn from it.
Wait, when you say it a negative, what do you mean?
Negative as in the negative version of you, the opposite of you to an extent, the things that you don't have.
Well, like, I guess I was thinking, like, well, an example would be this, for instance. My spirit animal is a bear,
Mhm,
right? But there's an argument to suggest that what I really needed at a young age was
mhm,
that strength, that endurance, that perseverance because of
mhm,
my surroundings and my upbringing. You
mhm,
know, and so I guess that begs the question. There seems to be sort of the supplemental thing,
mhm,
just like, for instance, angelic energy as a guide. That just means that someone got real messed up in their childhood, and or what you're kind of saying is no matter what, I would have had a bear energy. And I believe that there is truth to that because of the first time that my main guide ever showed himself to me,
mhm,
he was wearing a bear pelt and then
mhm,
never once again. And so I think he was basically saying this is something we have in alignment.
mhm. Um, so I think where the difference in our thought processes on that is I don't believe we have just one. I
I
believe
agree.
there's one that's our main, but then there's another that represents the things that we don't have that we might need.
Mm,
I think that the initial one is representing the things that you do have, but kind of human life in general has kind of sullied it to an extent, kind of gotten rid of it. Just your circumstances kind of dictate that that's not going to be as prevalent. I think that the initial one is more of your base instinct, and as you grow or experience more things, your base instinct kind of fades away to an
For you,
extent.
would that be the horse or the raven?
Not sure.
Interesting.
Not sure. I don't do much work with spirit animals, honestly, mainly because it doesn't really fit in with the set of things that I typically work with.
That's
I
fair.
mean, doing investigations, doing demonics, I'm not really the type of person who does readings by
No,
any
no, no.
means.
Yeah, I'm asking, I guess, sorry, because I've never gotten to ask you these questions, not because I feel like I love just hearing your opinion on things. Like, because they're always very well thought out. Like, you're never just pulling out of your hip. So, moving forward through, okay, so spirit guides, spirit animals, right? These are things that we are sort of, they fall on the we don't got to ask for them, we just have them. Like, and thank God. There are capabilities and potentials that, well, they are realities that we have the potential to go and investigate relationships with. Do you feel, when did you sort of have your first experience with a spirit guide? And did you even know that that's what was happening? Because I know you said you and your mom, like, no one was really talking about stuff like that in the household.
When I was very young, I did. I had no idea what it was. It was just kind of an entity that stood in front of me and basically more or less told me what to do and then left. And I was like, okay, that was odd. I never really. My
Were you,
first meeting wasn't intentional, at least. It
how
wasn't
old were you?
sick.
Okay. Dang. And was something scary happening?
Well, the actual event was kind of frightening initially because it
Yeah.
was just kind of out of the blue.
Yeah.
That being said, those kind of things happen to people who typically wouldn't seek them out. And
Yeah.
during that time frame, I know for a fact I would not have.
Yeah.
I think that my experience would have been a lot better if I was trying to meditate and trying to get it to come out. But it was very much just a, whoop, popped into my room. You're not doing this. Okay, bye. Popped out. Oh, okay then.
What were you not supposed to do?
I can't even remember, honestly.
Wow,
It
that's
was
so
so long
interesting.
ago. It was probably
Dang.
something really stupid, though.
Well, right. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's so unique too, because that is atypical to show for them to show themselves at such a young age.
Mm-hmm.
But they did with your mother, so I mean, her circumstance was a little bit different, but similar, but same bloodline. Okay, so fast forward sort of into a period of time. When did you sort of decide that for you magic was real, and for you this was something that you wanted to understand more?
With the magic, a lot of it was initially stemmed from trying to understand why certain demonics were in certain places and trying to figure out how to remove them. And that went downhill essentially into me reading tons and tons and tons of books on it, trying to understand. And I think that the biggest thing that kind of stuck with me and made me kind of go, okay, I understand, wasn't so much that it's never like, oh, I created fire. It's never like, I created this. It was kind of the older understanding that magic was just personal rituals that you would carry out that would kind of bring positive things into your life. And it was prior to biblical times. It was early Egyptian periods where they would do different rituals just in their household. That would be like, I have to, put out this incense at this specific time, or I have to make the bed at this specific time, or not be in the house at this specific time every single day. It was kind of more learning that magic in the past was seen as a beneficial habit rather than an actual active decision to cast some.
Okay, more of like a way of life.
Yes.
Would there be an argument to suggest that magic or that essence, that sort of controlling that active energy, because it is right
Mm-hmm.
there, if harnessed, it's active. Is
Mm-hmm.
that something like the ether, or is that something kind of like the force? If you go into Star Wars, like it's like, is it everywhere and then people can use it, or is it from within? What do you think?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. It's everywhere and it's from within. I mean, I was once reading a book and their explanation of magic was the energy with the earth and the individual operates. And I think that that's more of a description of it than anything I've ever heard or
That's a
seen.
great description of it. Something animates us.
Mm-hmm.
Something ties us to our body.
Mm-hmm.
Something doesn't prevents us from slipping out until we're prepared to do
Yeah.
so. You know, if you want to go into like something gives us that silver cord.
Mm-hmm.
So there does seem to be an organized design. What do you call that? And that's probably the
Mm-hmm.
same thing as what we would call
Yep.
dancing in a certain way so that it rains next week.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And old style magic, yeah, that was something that, I mean, certain groups would do, the different rain dances and things like that. But at its brass tacks, it was things like, oh, if I do this, then my day will go fine. If I do that, then I'll be okay. It was at a very base level, it wasn't an intent to impact how the rest of the world was behaving or what was happening at the moment. It was a habit that was meant to impact how your life was going at that moment. Obviously, eventually it became what we think of as magic now, which is all the rain dances and Native American tribes and things like that. But I think that if you kind of say that that is magic, all of the modern weird, I'm going to sacrifice blah, 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 so the sun won't explode kind of thing, then you're kind of limiting yourself to understanding it to an
Mhm.
extent. I think that it's important to really understand what people were doing in the past and why they were doing it, and kind of ignore the really big explosive events that people would do. I mean, most of the old grimoires, at least the grimoires that were familial based rather than like written by some government or some powerful entity, tend to just be things like, oh, you'll have good luck if you put this coin in your sock. You'll have this if you do that. It's almost closer to what we would call, oh gosh, why can't I remember this word? It's always the words that are like really common that just slip my mind entirely.
Well,
Walking
kinda
under a
like
ladder.
leveraging like superstitions?
Yeah, it was, you should view it as a ancient form of superstition that may or may not have been legit, and a few times it was, a few times it wasn't. It just depends.
Mhm. Also, our belief does a lot.
Yes, it
So, for
does.
instance, if your grandparents and your parents say, "Hey, man, put this in your shoe,"
Hmm.
you can kind of manifest that to feel and
Yeah,
be lucky.
absolutely. And I think that that kind of is where magic initially was. It was
Mhm.
your own intent and your own belief impacting what actually happened. It slowly developed into more external influences, but I think that the external influences are not what magic is, they're a consequence of knowing more about it.
Okay, that makes sense. It seems to be true that there is the white magic, right? Whatever you wanna call that, the right-hand path, the white magic, the black magic, sacrifice magic, creative magic, also
Hmm.
known as sex magic. So there's a lot of different vibrations that people can pull from essentially. That's what I
Hmm.
would call that, right? Those is just tapping into a different vibration of this energy.
Yeah, essentially. I still kind of cringe a little bit at the statement of white versus black magic just because it is an oversimplification of things. But there are different vibrations that you pull from to get certain results. And there are different tasks or rituals that you do to get certain things to behave in certain ways. One of the reasons why I think sacrificial magic was so popular, especially in the Mayan civilization, for example, was that life energy tends to be the strongest in general,
Yeah.
and it tends to be the thing that you see the most return from.
Yeah. It's the ultimate
Yeah,
cost. It's the
yeah,
ultimate price.
absolutely. And life energy and sacrificial magic, I kind of view as an offshoot of blood magic to an
I mean,
extent.
it is, right?
It is, but blood magic doesn't typically result in the death of someone or the
Mm,
death of something, while
mhm.
sacrificial magic does. I
Yeah.
think sacrificial magic was taking blood magic and kind of expanding upon what you expect to happen.
Well, and even though it's not humans, right? They
Mhm.
say the Abrahamic religion sort of attempted to halt some the human sacrifice. But
Mm-hmm.
when you go back through scripture, they're asking for like 800 bulls at any given point. Like, you know, I mean, there's a lot of death that is kind of being paid to the
Mm-hmm.
Abrahamic God.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that is like a reason to hate the Bible or whatever. But I think we can definitely recognize that that is not a current thing that
No,
would
it's
anyone
not.
would be comfortable with now.
I mean, if you pull up the kill count of the Bible, the devil has what, 4, and God has millions and millions and millions. Yeah.
I don't know, but that's a good point. But too, you know, that's the theory about Jesus, was
Mm-hmm.
that he was supposed to be the final sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And thus the sacrifice was not necessary anymore or something. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah. So that does bring up the idea of right hand, left hand path again, because that does state that human sacrifice is not always a negative thing. It's
Correct.
just nowadays it would be. But if you use the idea of dark versus light magic, what comes up is the impact doesn't matter, it's the action. And that kind of is counterintuitive to what magic is as a whole. It
Wait,
is,
say that sentence again.
if you are using the white or black magic mindset, it removes, basically what it's doing is it's saying the impact of that spell isn't what you're looking at, it's the actual
I
ritual
see.
that was used to take
And
place
that's
to cause that
backwards.
impact. And that is simply not really the case with a lot of magic. The impact is what determines its worth. It's not, well, I had to do something negative to get this result. Well, there are so many other things that have to be taken into account on that. I
Mm.
mean, was the person who, if you're doing sacrificial magic, was the person who was involved in the sacrifice willing?
Mm.
I mean, that would immediately change that. Was the intended results good? Was the person who was being sacrificed negative? Was it asked for? Was it? It's very complicated, and I
Who's
think that
asking for it
yeah,
is a good
well,
question too, you know?
yeah, and I think that when you try to say something is black magic, it kind of reduces a lot of the thought and conversation that can be had behind it.
Mhm.
While left hand path, since it's basically just the impact is supposed to positively influence me, and if it is negative, I'm going to transfer that on to someone else. I think that allows for more open ended conversation
Mhm.
than
Mhm.
this is dark magic, this is evil, period, end of story.
Mhm.
The dark magic versus white magic thing is kind of a modern church thing.
Mhm.
It was never, that was never what they were perceived as before the church kind of stepped in and ruled magic as being heresy.
Mm.
In fact, if you go back in time, there are several grimoires that were even written by the Catholic Church at one point.
Mm.
They were practicing magic.
Mhm.
But at some point it changed and they started saying, "Oh, well, it's black magic or white magic. You're either good or you're evil, and white magic is only church related."
Mm. So where does the alchemical thing come in? Because obviously, to me at least, all of those texts are just discussing it's another form of a grimoire.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, I would say that even chemistry nowadays could be perceived as another form of magic as well. I think that it is what you're trying to produce and what the use of that object would be. But if it's just, I'm just having fun, I'm trying to make gold, I'm trying to do this, it tends to be more neutral.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, you never hear any sort of designation of good or bad to alchemical behaviors, and I think that
You
it's
don't.
unique that it escaped that stigma so fully.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons why it escaped that stigma was because there is legitimate science that can be used to represent certain things in alchemy. I mean, obviously, there's no science to turning lead into gold as a human being, but there is science behind all of the different chemicals that they've used. And there are modern discoveries that we still have that were only made available because alchemy was a thing.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And I think that alchemy, because it was, to an extent, alchemy is taking things that already exist and trying to change their form. That is basically the definition of it. So you're not using energy or things that people can't see. You're using things that are very, very physical and in front of you. So it was difficult to say that using the resources that you had on the earth that, according to the church, God provided was evil. So they kind of just ignored it to an extent.
True, but wouldn't there also be a suggestion to say they were very good at concealing their goings on? Like, I don't know that it was just overtly.
Oh no, they absolutely were, but they also weren't the people that they were sending, inquisitors after either.
True. Yeah.
I mean, there
Well,
was
that was
kind
much
of
later in time, right?
well, absolutely yes, but still, to an extent, they were never the group of people that were looked down upon. They were thought of as scientists. They weren't thought of
Mhm.
as magicians or witches or
Well, they were patroned
exorcists.
by wealthy individuals,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
they were perceived as a science worth investing in.
Yep. And that's kind of the reason why you don't see people label paths with alchemy, is because it was so heavily accepted during its time frame that it was just kind of, it just is what it is. It was just a normal day-to-day thing that some people did.
So is there any, back to kind of for you personally in your world, are there any of those rituals, so to speak, that you do maintain for yourself? As far as
Yeah.
like, well, this is something I do. So what's an example of something that you're like, yeah, I keep up with this?
Well, I keep a silver coin in my pocket all the time.
And what's that for?
So silver has been, well, I'll bring up the actual like chemical thing with silver. They used to use silver for gunshots in the Civil War because silver was very bacterial, and it would
Yes.
prevent people from getting infections. And there was always this belief surrounding silver that it would kind of remove negative ailments or remove just negative energy from your life. So I
Oh,
carry that
silver
with me.
bullets.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
that's probably the most extreme
But
usage of silver, but
I do remember that now.
and I carry a piece of silver with me everywhere. And just so you know, the spot price on a silver coin is not high enough to rob me, anyone who's watching this. But that being
Watch your
said,
pockets tomorrow.
I carry that with me. I mean, you know about my tattoo. That's one of those things. It's kind of a ritual that I don't have to do anything with, essentially,
Hmm.
every day.
Yeah.
But I mean, you could even point towards someone like making their bed every morning as a form of ritual.
Yeah, it's an organization. Well,
Mm-hmm.
so do you remember when, so I'm going to talk around this as much as possible because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get too on the nose about it. But, there was a situation that was, an area of importance was sort of undergoing some duress, right? And I was really, really, really worried about it. And I just couldn't get it off my mind. And I wound up typing something out and it was meant to be read, but I wasn't expecting anyone to because it was
Mm-hmm.
ungodly long.
Yeah.
But there were really two people on my mind. And that was sort of put in there if you wanted to go find that.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't figure out why I felt so focused on writing this. It didn't really say much about anything, frankly, like you
Mm-hmm.
weren't going to glean much from it. And it was like, I mean, I literally looked down and I looked back up and it was like 2.5 hours because I'd
Mm-hmm.
actually deleted part of it. And I was like, oh my God, I do have to do this. I need to retype
Yeah.
it. And I couldn't figure out what that was. And then I kind of realized at the end of it, I mean, somebody let me know, I guess, where it was like,
Mm-hmm.
this was a form of spell casting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the
Essentially.
cost that was paid was my time.
Yep.
And so there is a recognition where, I don't feel particularly comfortable with the topic of magic.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, intuitively, whether I was guided to do it that way or what, there is no mistake to me
Mm-hmm.
why that sort of just acts. I mean, I feel like it kind of accidentally happened,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt so strongly that I was like, there has to be something I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows if that was ever anything, but it was sort of a way for me to set my sights if somebody did have a weapon on the ones that I wanted the sight on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think, and my intention was that if anyone did read it, that the reason it was available to be read was so that that would then continue to charge it. That was my hope. And I don't have any reason to know what any of that means, but it was very intuitive. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah. Makes sense.
So who knows?
So I think the biggest fear of magic, because you did mention fear a little bit,
Hmm.
comes from all of the different movies, all the opinions of the church, all of the different modern day things that we have that are put out there that basically kind of steer people away from doing it and kind of convince people that every ritual, every magic, whatever is evil. And there is that's kind of ridiculous, honestly. I mean, everything that you do in your life on a regular basis is a ritual to an extent. Even going to work is technically a ritual. And magic is really just the outcome for doing those rituals. If you really want to get down to the brass tacks.
Really quick, I have to tell you what just happened.
Hmm.
Let me make sure it's open. Okay, I was about to freak because like my AC, nothing is on, and the whole room has been entirely still for a hot minute, and then my foot, it felt like a huge breeze just ran over it. But I do have my window open, so it's probably that. Before I call a paranormal investigator,
Oh God.
check the windows.
Yep.
But I hear you. I'd like to defend though that you please do understand my fear actually comes from the fact that I didn't even believe in it or think it was real or anything about that necessarily. And then I was introduced to clients before I had a firm understanding of that. And so then I stepped into, and I recognize this is an interesting sample size, right? I get that. I continued to see people claiming to wield it, and I felt that they were very unwell. So my sample size kept telling me, this isn't what people think. This isn't what people think. And so that made me very cautious.
Yeah.
On top of it, I did sort of have that satanic connection to it as well.
So that kind of leans back towards what we talked about in the other episode is edgy people who just want to get into something because it makes them seem tough or different. The thing is whenever anything is good, we've come to the modern understanding that we don't attribute that to magic. Because magic has been stigmatized to the point where everything that is magic is evil. So if you do something that benefits someone else, that's not magic, according to modern belief. But that
Interesting
was
point.
never
That's just
what
thoughts
it
and
was.
prayers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good point. Excellent point. Wow.
So all these clients that you're seeing, you're never going to have one that approaches you and says, I'm I do healing. I'm a magician. You're never going to hear that because magic nowadays is viewed as something negative. But you will hear people say, oh, I give blah, blah, blah a curse because of magic.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, if you really wanted to, and you actually took the time, even guides are technically magic.
Right.
Even readings are technically magic. Magic is whatever
Reiki
have
is magic.
Yeah. So it's not, there's no pure evil behind it, despite what the church wants you to think. I think that one of the modern day issues is that because we have become so individualistic as a society, that people are only grasping onto the things that benefit themselves
Self-serve. Yeah.
without looking at the issues that those present. And that is also why you have a lot of people who are like, oh, I practice this magic, I practice that magic, I do curses, I do blah, 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 blah. Just because, I mean, people just want to be different, honestly. People just want to have something unique.
Well, and they want control in a world that feels very out of their control. And I can't demonize people for wanting control. I just wish they were a little bit wiser about how they went about it. Because like you said, and I would love, 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 because I read about this and I've been warning people about this for a long time on this podcast. But break down for me how you would describe the law of three.
We're going to need an entire episode for that one.
Dang, really? Because we can put okay, then let's save that because I do absolutely want to get into that because I've described it in a very rudimentary way. But yeah, okay, cool. We can definitely that would be an amazing episode. Okay, cool.
I will say though, all of the Native American rituals, I mean, you would attribute all those to magic even prior to any kind of conversation about it, correct? Native American magic?
I just am not very familiar with it.
Okay. But when you think of the Native Americans, do you think of negatives? Do you think of very dark things with them? Is that the first thing that pops into your mind?
No, but I perceive them as very knowledgeable about ancient arts.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm getting at is a large portion of Native American practices can be attributed to magic. And if magic was entirely evil, there would be that stigma with the Native Americans as well. And it would not be,
True.
oh, they're these wise practitioners. It would be, oh, they're these evil individuals who do certain
Mm.
things. I mean, yes, there is darker magic that's used amongst the Native Americans. At some point, we'll talk to someone who grew up on a reservation and go into that.
Oh, I'd
But
love to.
it just, why is it we're ascribing magic as negative to everyone but the Native Americans?
Well, I mean, I don't, dude, I don't think people are. I think people are looking at druidic tendencies as, something to be brought back and remember, like I truly think that I might be in the minority as far as the caution I feel towards it.
I don't know. You look at a lot of the religious people,
Yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. That's good.
terrified by
Yeah,
it. And I mean, look at the percentage of religious people just in the United States, for example. It's significantly higher than non religious people.
true.
And they would probably all have the same opinion that magic is evil. But then you'd bring up the Native Americans and they'd be like, oh, well, they're
That's a great
interesting. They did
point.
all these things. They're so smart.
No,
It's not.
excellent point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a situation where I think that a large portion of it is ascribing evil to the people that are like you rather than the people who aren't. And this idea that it would be a negative thing for you to do it, so everyone who does it has to be negative, other
Mm,
than the ones who
mm,
are basically worshipped for it, or I don't really, I guess worshipped isn't the right term for the Native Americans, the ones who are respected for
mhm. I mean, that's an excellent point from the perspective of really shamanic journeying.
it. Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that really? You know what I mean? Like that's a meditative state where you really are affecting your own personal energy,
Mm-hmm.
potentially affecting where some of the energy is stuck, right? So a
Mm-hmm.
retrieval method is present there as well. So it's a lot to do with healing,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. So that's kind of awesome. I've never heard of a shamanic journey where you're going out to cause trouble.
Yeah.
I'm sure it happens, but it's one of those things where it's like, all right, well, but you're right. It's no different. And I think that's something where I had to wrestle with that thought recently. I talked to you about that
Mm-hmm.
recently, where it's kind of like, okay, what is the difference between somebody who signs a deal with a demonic energy and becomes psychic versus somebody who didn't? And how is that
Mm-hmm.
different? Well, I had to work for it a little bit. It didn't, there's things, and I don't, that's hard to enunciate to a person who would like to just say that it's all bad.
Yeah. Um, I think to answer your question though, things that appear instantaneously and easily are almost never appearing through good means.
I agree. That's hard to, yeah. Yeah. And you kind of went into that on the episode where we were talking about the angels kind of and how
Mm-hmm.
hard it is to sort of get them to show
Yep.
up to do their job almost, so to speak. And I'm not,
Yep.
please, dear God, don't strike me. Like, I am not complaining about angels not doing that. I'm just saying, like, there is an expectation that you pay a price.
Yep.
And I'm starting to realize that that really is the defining difference of good and bad magic,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, is my price to be in connection, be closer, quote unquote, to the veil, is that it took time, and I paid your mom, it took resources.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it didn't happen overnight.
Yep.
And I did have a bloodline propensity to it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these reasons that are present, but I would be lying if it didn't occur to me when somebody would say to me, or, well, how do you know you're talking to who you think you are?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, dang.
Well, the biggest difference is are you giving them exact answers? Are you being like, no, this is exactly what's going to happen? Because if it was a demonic that was causing that, it would be honestly more powerful for one, but it would also be more direct. It would never be, well, you'll likely have this if you do this. It will be, this is what you're going to have. This is what you're going to do.
Why do you think that the practicing Catholic exorcists, right? Because I was watching a lot of their stuff because I was trying to understand more about kind of the legal understanding of how they work with and
Mm-hmm.
deal their work with demons. But they always are so sure that anytime anyone's participating in mediumship, that it's all demonic energies. And they're like, sure.
Well, when you read the Bible, there's plenty of mention of mediums being perfectly fine. I mean, not God, Jesus visited a medium, for example, or a mystic specifically. I think that the biggest thing is that they view any power that is outside of human understanding, that is not derived from God, as evil. And I think that it complicates things if you try to get them to view things from a kind of grayscale rather than black and white, because they will start doubting themselves at that point as well.
And they can't afford to,
No.
because their belief is what makes them strong.
Yeah. Catholic exorcists, at least a large portion of them, and I'm not talking about the top of the top, I'm talking about the guy who thinks he's an exorcist who suddenly wants to get ordained to do that, are typically people who have a little bit of narcissism in themselves. They're people who believe that they are chosen to do that job. And there's necessarily not another option for them. That is what they do. That's what they were meant for. Period. End of story. And that's not correct.
Well, I
I mean,
guess. Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry. No.
Well, I was going to say there's always options, but every Catholic exorcist I've ran across has been basically under the impression that God created me to be an exorcist. I am the exorcist. I am blah, blah, blah. And they've never been humble about it either. And they've been very outspoken about the fact that, oh, this is a power that God specifically has given me. And that is very narcissistic. I mean,
Just like the
yeah,
sigils and what was the title? Emo or narcissistic?
yep, yep.
That tickled me so much when I saw that. I said, we're keeping it. But, so I'd like to go ahead and just say, there's two people that I consumed a decent amount of their stories. And
Mhm,
what I felt, the reason I could deal with it, the reason I could really hear them was because they were very low key about it all. In
mhm,
both ways, they were very much like, hey, you don't have to be, you have to believe all this, but this is how
yeah,
and they were, well, I guess a little bit more just like, here's my experiences.
mhm,
And so they were not really the ones that were demonizing mediumship necessarily. There were hints at like, hey, what you're talking to isn't what you think,
yeah,
but that sort of belief system. But one of the things that sort of was curious was they were, and this is important or very curious because of what
mhm,
your cousin does. I can't believe y'all are cousins but he said, when he would go into penitentiaries,
mhm,
he would say all these people who are just like could barely string together a regular sentence in their regular time are suddenly basically swearing at me in scriptural
mhm,
language, and trying to tell me where my authority is and what I can and can't do.
mhm.
And, that basically it was like these were not even who they were anymore because my presence was so offensive. Do you believe that that is a reaction one could get in that circumstance, or do you think that that is over blown
It's
just
definitely a
intuitively?
reaction someone can get. I think that his specific case, though, is a little bit more extreme than others because, I mean, he is a guard at a prison. He
No, no.
does have a position of power over them to begin with. So
Well,
there's,
you're no. This was an exorcist visiting
oh,
the. Yeah. He was
okay.
there to do
You mentioned my
something.
cousin. That's why I was kind of,
I know. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I only mentioned him because what an interesting place for him to sort of hold
yeah.
ground, regardless that he's not exercising people necessarily, but like it's just a
Mhm.
unique. He's doing work there, whether he knows it or not.
So if you're talking about those kind of reactions at a prison, I can see that happening mainly because, I mean, the demonics that are attached to them are kind of stuck there too.
Mm.
I mean,
They can't
they
jump
would,
ship.
I mean, they could, but took them so long to get attached to that person. Why would they? As long as that person's
Really?
released at some point. But it's prison is a situation where the base instincts of both human and inhuman kind of explode. It's not like normal society where you have to be withdrawn about those kind of things in order to make it.
Hmm.
So I can very well see people going into a prison as an exorcist and getting that response. because, I mean, they can't do it in normal day to day, but they can do it when, they already are basically exposed. That being said, I will say, to a lot of exorcist credit, they are pretty much only dealing with the darker side of things in general. So when they are running across metaphysical people, when they are running across people who do mediumship, they're only running across like the 0.2% of the population that did something stupid. They're not
Yeah,
running
and that
across
needed
every.
them to come
Yeah.
fix it. I
Yep.
see, I see, I see. Yeah, that's a great point. Oh my god, that's an amazing point. Dang, they're seeing like the worst case scenario all the
Yeah.
time.
But I will say
Would you perceive yourself sort of as an exorcist in the work that you do?
it's complicated. I think the word exorcism has become so intrinsically linked to the church that it is. I would not call myself an exorcist necessarily.
Okay, how would you describe the way that you essentially engage these energies?
Through study and practice rather than through belief and worship.
Okay.
There are huge, huge cases of exorcists not doing any research into what's possessing that specific person and just praying and saying, oh, well, that got it, that got rid of it. And I'm not going to say whether or not that actually works, but I will say there have been a lot of freaking people that have had exorcists done that I've had to go investigate 3 weeks later because shit got worse.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't always work. And I think that there is a large misunderstanding amongst those people with that.
Mm-hmm.
I would say exorcist is kind of one of those, almost like a curse word in my mind. Whenever I think
Interesting.
of someone who is very intent on getting something done but has done no research into the topic or has done no individual research into that situation, I always think exorcist.
Okay.
And I mean, it is kind of sacrilegious to say, oh, they never get it to work, blah, blah, blah. And that is wrong. Sometimes it works. But more often than not, the ones that work are the ones that have some kind of research into it rather than just, I'm going to tie this person down to a chair and I'm going to do an exorcism on them.
Well, the thing that these two in particular that I really the reason I was
Mm-hmm.
listening at all and valued what they said was because they were really deeply, deeply acknowledging the spiritual realms.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a knowingness. Like I've never really seen anybody from a religious background speak so clearly of, yeah, there are rules here. It's basically like legal work.
Mm-hmm.
They know the laws backwards and forwards. It's up to us
Mm-hmm.
to understand what our laws are, sort of, and to kind of just acknowledge that this spiritual warfare is happening at any given time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are outliers in the exorcist community, and I mean, most of them still won't like the metaphysical just
No, right.
because, you know, they're of the impression that if you're not talking to God, then you're talking to a demonic. There's no ghosts, there's nothing like that, there's no spirits. Everything either goes to heaven, hell, or, limbo. Period. End of story.
What do they, because forgive me, maybe this is my ignorance. Do they perceive limbo in a synonymous fashion as we would perceive like the astral, or they don't even consider it's like that?
It's not at all like we would consider it.
Wow. See, that's so interesting because like the astral is kind of like a fact. I mean, I know that sounds weird or like, but it functions reliably.
The mindset is essentially that once you've left your mortal body, you are no longer able to be on Earth unless you are a demonic.
Yeah. No, I don't believe that.
And that is where a lot of their beliefs come from on everything is a demon, everything is evil. And that is a problem with the church in general, is everything they don't understand is evil. I mean, you go to any metal show, you'll see people picketing outside of those. I mean, hell, I went to a freaking Under Oath show at one point, which is a very, very Christian band, by the way. And there
Mhm.
were 30, 40 people outside picketing how evil they were and how satanic they were. And it's like, dude, have you seen the lyrics? No. No, they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't agree with them, but no, they're not evil.
Well, and
It
also for
is.
the listeners, when we say the church, a lot of what we're discussing as well is kind of the like we're thinking like Nicene Council stuff. We're thinking like when the perspective on these topics were rewritten.
Mhm,
Because I feel like a lot of I mean, I don't maybe I just don't spend a ton of time around people who are quite overtly active in religious practice per se.
mhm,
But I mean, Terry is a Christian. I
mhm.
believe in a higher power. Like there are things that I believe are true, but I think it's a bunch of yes and.
Yeah, and when I specifically mean the church too, I mean as an organization, kind of a general thing, rather
Yeah.
than the individual. There's always going to be people who don't behave the same way that the organization does. But the biggest
Well,
problem
we are
is,
in alignment with the
yeah,
church in some
no,
ways from the perspective of we know that there are
mhm,
angels. We
mhm,
know that there are demons. So we're not really arguing against them necessarily. There's a very exclusive practice that is
mhm.
interwoven in their belief systems.
I will say it is kind of ironic when it comes to the church, though, because the same people who say that everything is evil are also the people who are slowly moving towards the side of demons aren't real. There's no such thing as demons. Everything is love and light. God created it this way. And it's really, really weird to me
I
because
think that's
someone
by
will say
design.
something like that and then in the same sentence be, talking about, Slayer, how evil Slayer is, how evil this band is. I mean, the majority of the members in Slayer, if I remember correctly, are Catholic. So, no.
Well, the thing too is I have always believed because I've had three very, very raised very religiously individuals in my life through my life, and they were all very, very gifted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have always said, even before I trained with, even before I really knew what I was saying, I always had a belief system that even if you, no matter if you're raised in an Islamic faith practice
Mm-hmm.
or if you're doing anything that is stretching and using the spiritual muscle,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be in alignment
Yeah.
a little bit more than the person that isn't. And so then I think that was what was always curious to me was like, I had an old friend that you met that used to come to dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and she was raised Free Will Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
So they were just praying all the time, every time, everything. And she had gifts that would have resembled psychic behavior, and so that's okay if you're
Mm-hmm.
part of the congregation and you're considered gifted and touched. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
great because I think it's all true. But you do, I used to always wonder like, oh, why can't I, like, why am I not like them? And I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea that later in my timeline there would be sort of a opening of that door. So I used to perceive that as very enviously, even though I didn't know I believed what they were. I just knew it was interconnected.
I do find it kind of interesting too that really the only religion that is super against intuitives in general is Christianity. I mean,
Mm,
Islam is not against them. Even Judaism isn't really against them. And then you look at all the different Asiatic religions and different beliefs over there, they are not only not against them, most of them practice it.
mm-hmm.
So it's very telling to me that the religion that doesn't practice it regularly is the religion that doesn't like it,
That's
typically.
fair. That's an interesting point. What are your thoughts on whenever Terry has said that somebody is actively working with like Mother Mary or actively working with an archangel? What does that really mean
Well, my opinion is that those spirits, entities, whatever have you, are not in one place
at one time?
at one time. They
Right.
are spread out throughout large groups of people. So when someone is working with them, I don't really take that as they're, lucky, special, whatever. I take it more as that's just one of the people that happen to be in that spiritual path.
Yeah, that cohort almost.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that once a lot of people pass, they kind of realize to an extent that the spiritual side isn't really evil and it isn't really a negative. And I think that there would be no use for Mother Mary or an archangel to work with someone who was narrow minded against what does exist and what is available because they wouldn't be able to get very many things done, typically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I mean, whenever I hear, oh, this person's working with that, I don't really feel one way or the other about them, honestly.
Mhm.
It's just kind of, oh, okay.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I guess so then when we think about like we kinda talked about with the guides and that there's probably an attunement to something,
Hmm.
right? But I guess so much of that is what? Done in the unspoken unconscious world? So, how are they able to sort of act with us when we aren't particularly like, how much of the time are they not able to have an impact because we don't even believe that they're there? Or does our belief even come into play?
All the time.
Okay,
All the
help me like, what does that look like to you do you think?
If someone isn't receptive to communicating or understanding that something is there, they'll just ignore it completely. And I mean, I imagine that that can get very frustrating on the entity or spirit's part, but everything is free will.
Mhm.
So it is up to our decision being in the world of the living how we're going to live our lives. So it's not just is what it is. I'm sure every single human being on the planet has had something try to come converse with them at some point, and only a very, very, very small percentage of them actually listened or actually understood that what was going on was happening. It just is what it is.
Mhm. Dang. That kinda puts us up against a hill, doesn't it?
Mhm. Well, I mean, imagine if all of the different biblical events happen nowadays.
What do you mean?
Every single person, like, would say Noah happened now. Well, Noah would be in a nut house and we'd all be drowning.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, then you kinda get into the cryptids that are detailed out in the Bible. That's always fascinating to me. Um, I'd love to understand more of that. There's so many
Mhm.
things that I feel we have breadcrumbs to, but we'll never have an answer to. And that kills me sometimes. But I have to just, disconnect from that because
I'm
I
sure
want to
there'll be an
know.
answer at some point, but there'll be an answer at some point, but it just won't be in our lifetime, pretty much.
Do you think when we die, we can peek at it or we're not allowed to?
I think we can peek at certain things. I don't know if it's not allowed to. I think it's just so much that you can't really see everything.
Do you believe that a lot of the things that are described in Revelations have already occurred? Because Terry said yes, and I thought that was interesting.
I think that that's kind of a sensitive topic. My response to that would be yes, but that doesn't mean that they were specifically tied to revelations either. Sometimes those kind of negative things occur and then it just fizzles out. Sometimes those events that they're talking about in Revelations happen, but none of the other ones happen, so they just kind of don't do anything. My opinion is that all of them have to happen within a certain time frame for anything to actually be legitimately said, oh, well, this occurred because of Revelations. It's
Well,
difficult.
like, for example, the Euphrates is dry as all
Mhm.
hell.
Yeah,
That's weird,
yeah, it
right?
is. It's very
You
weird.
know, some
And
things are weird.
yeah, that happened, but I think that attributing that to specifically Revelations would also require everything else in Revelations to happen, at least within 100 years.
Do you feel that we are in any particularly interesting time?
Well, absolutely. I think that because we've kind of strayed so far from what humans were kind of intended to live their lives as, we've become much more likely to have very negative things happen to us. And I do think that those kind of events are interesting to an extent. I think that our time frame is going to be one of kind of rebirth and re-understanding rather than a time frame of complete destruction. I think that we're
And
going
you're talking about
to
like our lifetime, right? Like you
yes.
and me, our mortal existence. Okay, so you don't feel like we're going to go through a cataclysm so much as like everything's just going to be weird for a long time?
I don't think it's going to be an event that happens at once. I think that things are going to go to hell slowly. It won't be like Revelations and it won't be cataclysmic, but it'll be things slowly getting worse and worse and worse and worse until one day something snaps and we either get significantly better or we get, just neutral, I guess. I mean, we've already seen a lot of that with like the COVID situation with all of the lockdowns. And we've already seen that with, basically the war that we're going to have with plenty of different countries right now about what's happening in Russia. I mean, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, that won't happen, but yeah, it probably will. You're looking at one country that is trying to essentially take land that, even if it was theirs at one point, is not theirs anymore. And we're basically, more or less, the major thought process for what would be going on with a lot of the people are just give up the land. Well, when that happens, it's going to keep getting worse. So I do think that we're in a situation where everything's going to slowly devolve and get significantly worse. But I also think that that's kind of always the case.
I thought so too. Yeah, I think you're absolutely. I don't know that anybody in our recent history has experienced anything that one could perceive as a forward growth, good momentum. Like, right, like we have
Yeah.
controllers over our world right now, and they are very motivated in not really showing us much of what's true. But I was thinking, there was a whistleblower who knows if this is real, but it certainly gave me a burst of hope. But he was sort of talking about how he had been present and a participant in some of the looking glass experimentations, and that the reason it was shut down and hidden so aggressively by the government was because every time that they would look, there is an active timeline convergence. And he basically was like, every time we try, this was always the answer. And it basically is sort of a revelation of the lies that are sort of over our world. And so he said, so to them, they always treated that like that was the end of the world, and they would do everything they could to stop it. But he was like, but in a reality of a sense, that is, and it's unbeatable, he said. So no matter what they would try to do, and they were always, he kind of was like, they were always trying to figure out how they could adjust something so dramatically to change it. And apparently they were not able to. And that's, I mean, if that's legit, God, I hope it is.
Well, on top of that, it is kind of impossible to alter something knowing it's going to happen, because you don't know whether or not you knowing that this is going to happen is what causes it to happen.
Oh yeah, it's the Greek tragedy, right?
Yeah.
I
I mean,
always think about that.
it's kind of a cognito hazard, honestly.
But I think that there is something very cool, if that's true, right? If there is a breakdown in timelines to where it's all leading towards this one event, and the event is more about truth and about sort of like that we're under a thumb a little bit, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
Just because it means that there is not, and there doesn't seem to be a way to stranglehold the natural order.
Yep.
That's kind of hope bearing.
I would definitely say that we are likely to be kind of. I would say that there are things that are going to happen that are unavoidable. And I would say that those things, knowing about them, might actually make them happen sooner, not later. So my mindset is that I don't know if we should even worry about them right now, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
worry about what? We don't even know. We don't even have the things to worry about fully in front of us. Like we're very concealed from it. And I'm okay, I mean, like we got to pay our bills, and I can't submit to nihilism with it because I don't think that that's the answer. I also can't overfocus on it or I get a little bit crazy.
The thing about that, too, is nihilism has good things and bad things. The mindset is you can either go down one path, which is nothing matters, so why should I care? Or the other path that is nothing matters, so I'm going to do whatever I want, as long as it's not negative. And my mindset is that if you're nihilistic in a healthy way, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I don't think it's in, I mean, it's not in my energy I tried it. Like I spent a lot of time being kind of nihilistic and atheistic and just sort of done with it all. And I wasn't particularly motivated or happy. Not that I need to be a big believer in some messianic change that will occur either. Like I'm just kind of hopeful that there is seems to be a give and take of good and evil.
Yep.
There's definitely an aggressive front of that. So I'd like to be on the right side of that if I can.
Yeah, definitely.
But man, what another wonderful conversation, dude.
Yep.
We're 2 hours in. I can't even remember how that happened. That's incredible. Well, next time I'm going to have, if you're willing,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about some of these rules next time. Rules like the rule of three, or even
Mm-hmm.
other ones I probably don't know.
Okay, definitely.
What do you think's one that I've probably never heard of?
Mhm. Yeah. So there are so many rules that it's kind of difficult for me to even know specifically what you've heard of, but I will say that the equivalent exchange thing in the freaking anime, the Full Metal Alchemist, is actually pretty close to
Oh,
right.
yeah. Y'all, there is so much disclosure in Japanese anime. It's
Yep.
crazy.
Yep.
I believe that. I believe that.
Well,
Hardcore.
my personal belief is also that kind of Japanese society is one of the only ones that, or at least the only modern societies that kind of has things right to an extent when it comes to spirituality. It is a lot more prevalent over there, but also a lot more understood over there.
Are you speaking on Shintoism?
That and even ignoring their religions, just society in general.
Oh,
I
I
mean,
see.
even
Yeah.
the atheists in Japan, a lot of them are very, very spiritual. The only thing that I would disagree with them on is their opinion on ghosts, but that was something that was so heavily influenced by just, you know, constant movies, constant scary
Mm.
stories that it just kind of held on. But everything else I'd say is pretty reasonably correct. I'd say the same thing about India to an extent as well. But I think Japan is a little bit closer just because they are integrating that into modern life, as opposed to like in India where it's kind of a separate thing to an extent.
Mm-hmm. It's
I don't know
definitely gotten
though.
more lost in the sauce with in India.
Well,
Well, then maybe I'll ask. Maybe if you could bring like your top three or your top five, where you're like, if I wish that if anybody was into this, I wish they knew about these rules,
okay, sounds good.
because those that frankly I would just die. I love stuff like that, and I really appreciate you sharing what you know.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. And I guess we'll try and have the meeting with someone from the reservations at some point.
Yeah, I would love that.
Do you want to do that as okay? So not in the video. Do you want to do that as a kind of like a halfway episode where it's like shorter and it's kind of not released at the same time the other episodes are, or do you want it to be a full 2 hour session or whatever have you?
What kind of so let's determine that when we sort of find out what this individual is comfortable with.
Okay, sounds good.
Perfect. And then we can kind of put our brains together with that. And then I'll work on my guy, see if I can get that on the books. And then we'll be
Sounds
rolling. That'll
good.
be so much fun. Look at
Sounds
us.
good to me.
Yay. I think the world of you. Happy birthday. I can't wait to see you
Happy
tomorrow.
birthday. Yep. See you
Yes.
tomorrow.
And then I'll chop this up and it'll be cool.
Okay, sweet.
Yay.
Sounds
I
good.
love you.
Bye.
Have a great night. Thank you
You
so much
too.
for just hopping on here randomly. I was
Yeah.
editing and I was like loving what we had talked about last time. And then I got the itch and I was like, wonder if he's free. So thank you
No
so
problem.
much. And I feel like I've learned so much. And I definitely
Mhm.
value your opinion about things because it's so obvious that you're very learned about it. But also just like letting me detour into the guides to just I love,
Yeah,
that
no
I'm ADD
problem.
as all hell.
Mhm.
All right. I love you. We'll talk
Sweet.
soon.